Welcome back to the deep dive. So picture this. You're standing in the produce aisle, right? You see that regular bundle of spinach, but then there's the organic one next to it. And you're wondering, is it worth the extra money? Well, today's deep dive is basically your shortcut for that exact moment. We're aiming to cut through all the confusion and give you some immediate, really practical knowledge about pesticide residues on fruits and veggies. Our mission today is to analyze those, well, famous lists, maybe infamous to some of the 2025, Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. Now, these lists, they come from the Environmental Working Group, the EWG. And importantly, they're based on actual government testing data. We're talking USDA data here, so this isn't just like someone's opinion. It's based on what federal agencies are actually finding on our food.
Exactly. And using that governmental data, that's what gives this real weight. Now, sure, the specific tests are mostly on produce sold in the U.S. market, but honestly, the implications go way beyond that. Think about it. How much of the food in your grocery cart, wherever you are, is imported? And that whole complexity, food crossing borders, that actually turned out to be the most, fascinating thing we found in the sources today. It kind of adds this whole other layer of maybe vigilance needed. It doesn't matter where you shop, really.
Okay, let's unpack this, right? Before we dive into that whole global produce connection, which sounds intriguing, we need the basics first. Let's start with the list that gets the most attention. The 2025 Dirty Dozen. So this is the list, basically, of produce found to have the highest levels of pesticide residues.
Yeah, and it's important to get how the EWG ranks them. It's not just like the total amount of pesticides found on one piece of fruit. They look at a few things: the percentage of samples that tested positive for any pesticide residue, the average number of different pesticides found on a single sample, and also the concentration of those residues. It's kind of a multi-factor score.
Ah, okay. So it's more about the mix, the cocktail, not just one single chemical.
Got it.
Okay. All right, let's run through the list quickly then, and then we can maybe talk about what they have in common. So the 2025 Dirty Dozen: spinach, strawberries, kale, collard, and mustard greens. They group those together. Grapes, peaches, cherries, nectarines, pears, apples, blackberries, blueberries, and interestingly, potatoes.
Right. And when you look at that list, a few things kind of jump out, characteristics they share. First, you've got those leafy greens: spinach, kale. Big surface area, lots of nooks and crannies, right? Residues can settle in, hard to wash off completely. Then you have the soft, thin-skinned fruits. Think strawberries, peaches, cherries, nectarines. Their skin is just delicate. It doesn't offer much protection. So when they're sprayed, the chemical is pretty much right there on the part we eat.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't exactly peel a strawberry or a grape, can you? But wait, if washing is supposed to get rid of surface stuff, why are things like apples and pears still high on the list? They seem a bit tougher than a peach.
Good question. And that leads to the third thing, which is really key: systemic pesticides. See, unlike a spray that just sits on the outside, systemic ones are actually absorbed by the plant through the roots, maybe the leaves. So the pesticide becomes part of the plant itself, and it makes the whole thing toxic to pests. Which means even if you peel that apple or scrub it really well, those residues, they're inside the flesh.
Wow, okay. Systemic? That changes things. Here's where it gets really interesting. You mentioned potatoes are on the list, too. That one seems different. It's a root vegetable, grows underground, thick skinned sometimes. Why is it in the Dirty Dozen?
Yeah, potatoes are a great example of, a couple of things. They do sometimes get systemic treatments during growing, but there's another big factor: storage. Potatoes often need fungicides applied after harvest to stop them from sprouting or rotting while they're being stored, sometimes for months. And those chemicals can seep in over time. So it shows that residue isn't just about what happens in the field, it's about the whole journey, the logistics, too.
Okay, that explains a lot. It really highlights why just washing everything might not be enough. So this Dirty Dozen list, it's basically your guide for thinking about when buying organic might make the biggest difference, especially if you want to cut down exposure to those systemic chemicals or those items with lots of different residues.
Exactly right. The analysts who rate the notes we were looking at, they mentioned this kind of clicked for them when thinking about blueberries. It's just a handful of conventional blueberries, such a small fruit. But because it's got that high surface area and no real protection, it likely got hit with multiple pesticides through its life cycle, plus maybe stuff for transport. And suddenly that abstract data point becomes a very real reason to be mindful when you're shopping.
Right. Okay, let's flip the coin now. Let's talk about the good news. We move to the 2025 Clean 15. These are the items with the lowest pesticide residues found in testing, often the safer bets if you're buying conventional produce.
Yes. And the Clean 15 really shows off nature's defenses, you could say. When you look at this list, you can almost see why they're cleaner. It's often about a thick skin or a husk, something that physically blocks residue absorption. Okay, so the list, in order. Pineapples, sweet corn, and they specifically note both fresh and frozen, which is interesting. Avocados, papaya, onions, sweet peas again, specifically frozen peas, asparagus, cabbage, watermelon, cauliflower, bananas, mangoes, carrots, mushrooms, and kiwi.
That list definitely feels less concerning, doesn't it? Looking at it, I immediately see things like pineapple, avocado, banana, things with really obvious protective layers. That thick rind, the tough peel, that's the natural offense you were talking about.
Precisely. The part we actually eat is shielded. For sweet corn, it's the husk. For onions, well, we peel off the outer layers anyway. Even something like asparagus, which looks kind of exposed, its growth pattern and maybe a shorter growing season often mean less chance for lots of chemical buildup compared to, say, strawberries, which need months of care.
Okay, so we've got the two lists. Dirty dozen, mostly thin-skinned or systemically treated stuff, high exposure risk. Clean 15, mostly thick-skinned or naturally shielded stuff, lower risk. That's sort of the basic takeaway most people get. But the really big insight, the thing from the research we pulled together that could actually change how you shop. It wasn't just what was on the list, it was where the stuff came from.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where we go beyond just the EWG rankings and think about like supply chains and regulations. See, when the data analysts looked at what was available in their local stores and compared it to these lists, a really interesting pattern showed up. They noticed that for them, basically every single item they could find from the Dirty Dozen list, spinach, strawberries, grapes, apples, you name it, it was imported. Every single one had come from another country to get to their store.
Wow. Okay, hang on. Every Dirty Dozen item they found was imported. That feels significant. It's just the residue levels aren't just about, like, how delicate a peach is. It's tied up in where it's grown and how it gets here. Why would that be?
Well, there are probably a few big reasons, and this is why it's such a key point for you, the listener. First, imported produce is grown under the rules of the origin country. Their maximum residue limits, or MRLs, might be different, maybe higher than where you live. Second, and this is huge, think about transport. To survive a long trip, maybe weeks on a ship or truck, produce often needs extra treatments after it's picked. We're talking fungicides, waxes, stuff applied specifically to stop it from spoiling over that long journey. These post-harvest treatments, which local stuff picked yesterday might not need at all, they add to the total chemical load. And that could be a big reason why these items end up on the dirty list more often when they're imported.
That makes total sense. They're treated not just for growing, but for traveling.
Okay.
And conversely, when the analysts looked at the Clean 15 items, what did they find there? Were they all local?
No, not all. It was more mixed. Only some of the Clean 15 items were consistently locally farmed. The rest were imported too.
Which specific Clean 15 items did the sources note as being locally farmed?
The ones mentioned consistently as local were pineapples, papaya, cabbage, watermelon, native bananas. They specified native ones, mangoes, and mushrooms. And this kind of reinforces the whole idea, right? When these naturally protected Clean 15 items are grown locally, they stay clean, their defenses work. But the flip side is the important part. If the Dirty Dozen items are consistently imported, maybe we should look at any imported thin-skinned fruit, anything you can't peel, with a bit more caution. It really suggests that where your food comes from, its origin, might be just as critical, maybe even more critical than just knowing if it's an apple or an avocado, especially when you're trying to minimize your exposure.
Exactly. So these lists, they give you that quick, actionable insight, and it's grounded in actual federal data. You know now that if you buy conventional stuff from the Dirty Dozen list, you're likely getting higher residues, maybe multiple types of chemicals. So what does this all mean for you when you're actually at the grocery store later today?
It means, well, the EWG lists are a great starting point for deciding between organic and conventional for specific items. But this extra layer, the observation that imported produce seemed to dominate the Dirty Dozen, that adds a really practical filter. If you're reaching for conventional and it's something on the Dirty Dozen list and you glance at the label and see it's imported, say, grapes from Chile or blueberries from Mexico, that's probably your strongest signal to maybe grab the organic version instead, or maybe switch to something from the Clean 15, ideally locally grown if you can find it. So the final thought to kind of carry with you is this. We see this difference in residue levels between stuff that traveled thousands of miles versus stuff grown nearby. So How much extra awareness, maybe how much extra caution do we need just because a piece of fruit or a vegetable crossed a border, especially knowing it was likely treated specifically for that long journey? That question about origin and travel should probably be right there in your mind next time you're checking that little country of origin sticker.